Doreen Ray Hitchens was born on November 29, 1952 in San Juan County, California. Her upbringing was described as peaceful, loving, and supportive. She went to college to study to become a physical therapist and managed to get a job in San Francisco Bay. Doreen was described by those who knew her best as a loving and generous spirit. Doreen later married a sprayer for the Lockheed factory named William Michael Mike Dennis. He had hearing loss and carried a stutter which deeply affected his socialization skills. But he found companionship in Doreen, and together they had a son, Paul Michael Dennis, in 1976. A year later, after their son was born, the couple divorced. Doreen remarried Charles Berbert, a carpet store owner, and started a new life with him in San Jose. Their life took a devastating turn in 1980 when 4-year-old Paul climbed a fence and fell into the family's backyard pool, drowning as a result of being unable to swim at such a tender age. Paul was on life support in the hospital for 3 days before passing away, his loss shattered everyone who loved him. By 1980, for 31-year-old Doreen was 8 months pregnant with Charles' second child, due in early November. Prior to falling pregnant, Doreen had suffered to miscarriages. She also shared a 4-year-old daughter with Charles. Deanna. After losing her eldest son, Doreen made sure that from a young age Diane knew how to swim. However, whilst Doreen had moved on, William Michael Dennis, her ex, had not. He harbored deep resentment, blaming Doreen for their son's death, as he believed she had been negligent in her duty of care, and began obsessing over the idea of revenge. In March of 1980, Mike filed a wrongful death suit against Doreen and Charles, but the courts ruled in favor of the Herberts at around the same time as the ruling. Mike lost his job at the factory at around 9:00 p.m. on Halloween night, October 31st, 1984, whilst Charles Herbert was out for approximately 15 minutes to visit the liquor store to buy more candy. Doreen answered a knock at the door. She was expecting it to be trick-or-treaters, as she and her daughter Diane had just returned from guising themselves. But standing there was a figure dressed in all black in a Wolf mask, brandishing an 18 machete. What the man uttered next chilled Doreen to the bone. Quote, "I am going to kill you." Before she could react, the Wolf man forced his way inside the home and launched a front attack. He struck Doreen repeatedly with the machete, leaving her with fatal wounds. Tragically, the brutal assault also killed her unborn son. According to Diana's later recollection of the harrowing events, the man slashed her mother's head and her body and hacked at her unborn brother, having removed the fetus from Doreen. Jamie Saliver, a retired officer from the San Jose PD who attended the scene, later described it in gruesome detail. Doreen was, quote, "fay open like a gutted deer." Her fetus lay on the floor underneath a chair with a jack-o'-lantern sitting on it. Saliver continued, saying, quote, "I look at the jack-o'-lantern and it is smiling over this baby. It was completely out of a horror film." Deanna, only 4 years old, witnessed the entire attack from behind a couch, hiding from the perpetrator. Doreen, in her final moments, had told her daughter to hide, likely saving her life. The massacre was over within mere minutes, leaving Behind a horrific crime scene, Charles returned home slipping on pools of blood that were on the floor. He hurriedly took Doreen and their baby to the hospital, but sadly both were pronounced deceased prior to their arrival. When authorities arrived at the San Jose residence with an inconsolable Charles sitting sobbing by the door covered in blood as Diana continued to hide behind the couch. The brutality of the crime truly shook the police officers to the core. The sheer amount of blood found was horrific, with it smeared all over the walls, the floors, furniture, and even on the ceiling. One damning piece of evidence was found discarded in the front yard: the Wolf mask worn by the perpetrator, which contained some hairs belonging to the assailant, though police initially considered Charles a person of interest, believing he and his wife may have had a domestic dispute. CCTV footage and witness testimony from an employee at the store placed him there at the time of the crime. When speaking to neighbors, they quickly turned police attention to Doreen's ex-husband. William Michael Dennis quickly emerged as the prime suspect. In this case, police discovered damning evidence linking him to the crime. Various blood stains were found leaving the Herbert residence and further down the street, of which samples were taken. Witnesses also reported seeing a man in a Wolf mask near the Herbert residence on the night in question, who very much resembled Mike Dennis. Another female witness later came forward to tell authorities that Mike wore the same Wolf mask the year prior at a Halloween party, where he was dressed as the Big Bad Wolf. A Polaroid of Mike wearing the exact same mask used in the murders was also later found and presented to the court. The clothes he wore in the photo were also found at his home. When police first visited his residence, Mike didn't answer right away, though the lights were on and officers could hear the water running. Officers feared he may have been trying to dispose of evidence. When Mike finally answered the door at around 12:20 a.m. on November 1st, somewhat calm and collected officers were invited in by him. When signing papers which allowed authorities to conduct a search of his residence, officers noticed a large gash across 3 of his fingers on his right hand. When questioned about this, Mike claimed he had cut himself whilst carving a pumpkin earlier that evening, but the vast amounts of blood oozing from the wound left investigators skeptical of his claims. The cut was so deep it was millimeter from the bone. Officers also found blood throughout his property, including on a gauze, several articles of clothing leading towards the washer in the garage, and on the door handle, steering wheel, and ignition of his truck whilst leading officers upstairs to his bedroom. Dennis abruptly reached for a .357 Magnum sitting in a holster hidden on the side of the headboard, but officers managed to refrain him from grabbing it, believing he would either harm himself or others present. Dennis was immediately arrested. Meanwhile, investigators discovered the receipt for the 18-inch machete, and even more disturbingly, the handcrafted adult-sized coffins and body bags presumed to be for Doreen and Charles. The murder weapon itself was never found. When questioned, Dennis showed no remorse, his deep-seated hatred for Doreen fueled by years of blaming her for their son's death and losing the court case, and his employment had driven him to commit the unthinkable. The brutality of the crime left even experienced investigators shaken. They believed that Dennis intended to kill Charles too, but he was sent home at the time, though he was initially released due to lack of evidence. For days after the killings, Dennis was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, one for Doreen and one for her unborn child, after the results of the blood samples revealed the blood type matched Mike Dennis. Furthermore, blood found at his home matched Doreen's blood type. Trails of blood from the Arbor residence also led straight to Mike Dennis's front door, approximately a mile and a half away, further incriminating him in 1988. At the trial, the prosecution presented a strong case detailing Dennis's long history of animosity towards his ex-wife. The gruesome nature of the crime, combined with his lack of remorse, painted a damning picture. Dennis, dubbed by the media as the Halloween hacker, changed his plea to not guilty by reason of insanity, with his defense arguing that the trauma of losing his son was a primary factor in his madness that was triggered that Halloween night when witnessing other youngsters trick-or-treating in the area. But the jury did not buy this in court. Deanna, only 8 years old at this time, bravely testified about what she had witnessed that night. She told the Santa Clara County Superior Court, quote, "My mommy said, 'Get out of my house,' and he said, 'I am going to kill you. My mommy told me to get behind the couch, so I did.'" Diana did not recall the man's face, but remembered the Wolf mask in fine detail. Deanna's harrowing account, along with forensic evidence and witness statements, led to Mike Dennis's ultimate conviction. Guilty of 2 counts of murder, in the first degree for Doreen and in the second degree for her son Dennis, was sentenced to death and was on death row at San Quentin State Prison for a number of years, though his sentence was later downgraded to life imprisonment following the removal of the death penalty from Californian law in 2019. Dean Herbert later spoke to the media as an adult regarding Mike Dennis's actions and the death of her mother, quote, "I can understand him losing a child, I get that, but you took something from me too. You took something big. You took my mom. You destroyed our family, and I won't forget that, but I do forgive him for it, 'cause for my own sanity, I don't want to be angry anymore." Despite the death penalty no longer being an option for Mike Dennis, both Diane and Charles believe it would be justified in this particular case. Both want Mike Dennis to know that they are survivors of his actions and that what happened hasn't defeated them, quote, "I want him to know we survived and we remaking it. He hasn't conquered us," Charles told the Late Count Record. The story of Doreen Herbert is one of love, loss, and horror. What should have been a festive Halloween night turned into a living nightmare, leaving a family devastated. Though justice was eventually served, the scars of that night remain a haunting reminder of one man's inability to move on from tragedy.